Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Last week, Scotiabank was ordered to pay over $30,000 after an investigation by Consumer Protection BC, the regulator for a range of sectors and consumer transactions in our province. According to the agency, Scotiabank contacted a consumer more than 100 times while trying to collect a debt, a violation of that consumer's rights. Which begs the question, what rights do you as a consumer actually have in British Columbia if a collection agency or company is chasing you for money? Here to break it down is the president of Sands & Associates, a licensed insolvency trustee with over 15 years of experience helping British Columbians navigate debt and find real paths to financial recovery. He is Blair Mantin. Blair, thanks so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So let's say I owe someone money and that it's an organization, a bank, and the bank is now chasing me to pay that debt. At what point does their behavior become harassment? Obviously, over 100 calls sounds like harassment, but is there a threshold?
You know, it's a bit of a gray area for sure, but there are things that are just not allowed. So they are allowed to call you 7 days a week. They can't call you before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m., but that's a pretty long window. Sundays, there's a reprieve. It's from 1 to 5 p.m., but still, that's a lot of time you can be subject to calls. So I think you have to be aware as a consumer, you might get these calls. The way I say it simply is they have the right to call you. You have the right to hang up the phone. You never have to engage with anybody. And these are generally not productive calls. If you could have paid the debt, you would have paid it already. You're probably already feeling pretty terrible about the situation. But have somebody literally coming through the phone at you, telling you how much of a bad person you are, how you're not upholding your obligations to society. That's not a call anybody really enjoys.
They're allowed to insult you like that?
Well, whether they're allowed to or not, those are the types of calls that I hear. And certainly it can make people feel pretty beaten down. So what was so important about this decision is I think it's now shining the spotlight on letting people know BC is one of the few provinces in Canada where you can just remove your consent to accept collection calls, and they have to respect that. And if they don't, they end up like Scotiabank paying 34 grand because they didn't respect those rules.
Okay, interesting. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of little laws as well, but broad strokes, as a consumer, what are my rights if a debt collection agency is coming after me?
Well, you have the right to demand written proof that you actually owe the money, because sometimes it's not you. Sometimes there's identity theft or various things like that. They can't disclose the details of, the debt to anybody else other than you. They're allowed to call people that you know to confirm your information, but not to, give any of your personal information away there. So you got the right to know the particulars. Now, you've also got the right to issue this letter called Request for Communication in Writing Only, and that says that they cannot communicate with you any longer as soon as you've given them that letter, given them an address where you can receive communications. That should be the end of it. And that's what, again, this case shows. They have to respect that, or there's real financial penalties that could ensue.
Interesting. Now, let's say someone is in this situation. At what juncture should they call you? Or a lawyer, I should say, in general.
Well, sooner than they think. And certainly a trustee is the person that you need to deal with if you know, hey, this is a valid debt and you just can't pay it off. If you're disputing the debt, you think it's not you, maybe a lawyer can help you. But if you know, hey, I just had to overspend, I got through the pandemic, something bad happened, and I've got some debt, a trustee is the person that can help you figure out what your options are. What most people end up doing in the province of BC is they end up doing a proposal where they restructure the debt. It brings the interest down to zero, which is a godsend for a lot of folks. The debt stops moving away from them. And then they just decide on how much can they afford to pay back. Usually it's somewhere between 20 cents on the dollar, 40 cents on the dollar, something like that. So someone could feel completely hopeless, getting beaten down by collection calls. When they reach out to a trustee, we're able to help them restructure that debt. And then by federal law, as soon as you signed a proposal, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Those calls have to stop, or the person's breaking federal law if they continue to pursue you after you've already worked with a trustee.
So I think this is really important to understand, that just because you owe a certain dollar amount, that can be negotiable if it's come to the point of debt collection, right?
That's the number one thing people have to know is you might have this balance that seems completely insurmountable, but what we do hundreds of times a month here is help people bring that balance down to what they can afford to repay. Again, no interest, they're protected from all the collection actions, and they just have to deal with the trustee. And I was mentioning to you a little bit earlier, BC is suffering more than anywhere else in Canada right now. The most recent statistics in September, it was a 40% year-over-year increase in the number of people filing.
40%?
40%.
Wow.
just in BC, number of people filing a proposal or a bankruptcy. You say, well, this is just all of Canada. No, all of Canada was 10%. Alberta went down. Ontario was about 7% up. So BC is suffering, and we know why. Almost everybody I see, they're spending half their income on rent. Groceries are expensive. It costs so much to live here. There's a crisis, and people need to know if they're facing debt. They don't have to take these calls. They can get some help.
So this is a really timely topic if BC is disproportionately affected, even compared to the rest of Canada, which then begs the question, do we have strong enough regulations to protect consumers from debt collectors in British Columbia?
I would say the regulations are pretty good, but it's a matter of you need to know about them to actually put them in place. So most people have no idea about a proposal. The number of people that only call a trustee when they think they've got to go bankrupt and it's, the worst day of their life. And then we can make their life much happier saying, no, you don't need to do a bankruptcy. Let's do a proposal. People need to know about that. On the collection side, a debt collector is never going to tell you, hey, you don't have to take my calls. You can send me this letter and I'll never call you again. And that's why with the Scotiabank award, when it was, consumer education, I doubt that's going towards telling people you don't have to take collection calls. It's going to be some, big nebulous thing into their broader financial literacy initiatives, which are sometimes self-serving. I would love for more people to be aware collection calls are by consent and you can remove that consent at any point. That's what I think consumer protection should be putting their money towards, is making people aware of the regulations that are out there.
Now, that $34,000 or so that Scotiabank had to pay out, that's not actually going to the consumer, right? It's not like they can use that money to then pay down the debt.
Which I think it should be. I think there should be a private right of action here, because that's when suddenly you'd have a bunch of people come forward because, this person had to file a complaint. They had a lawyer engaged. I'm sure the lawyer was charging them money to document all those 100 calls. And at the end of the day, they did something great for the public interest, but they got nothing back for themselves. If it's a consumer that can't afford a lawyer and maybe, is going to struggle to count all those contacts, I'd like for them to get something back, something for their time, really cause some pain to the creditor. And you're right, if it was a sizable amount of money back, they might even pay down the debt with that, just by people not following the rules.
Where does that money go then, that $34,000?
To Scotiabank's Consumer Education Fund.
What is that?
I don't know. Again, this is the bank.
Scotiabank is paying itself, is what I've heard.
Well, that's what it sounds like. Again, this is the bank if you're richer than you think, and maybe it's my industry, but I don't meet anybody that's richer than they think. Usually they're not as rich as they might think. So, maybe it's into things like, well, make sure to watch out for investment scams. It could be very worthwhile. I don't mean to be so cynical about it.
No, sure.
But I think it should be really on point, saying, hey, let's publicize to more people in BC. You've got this protection to not accept collection calls. It is as simple as the next person that calls you, pick up the phone, cut them off. What's your name? What's your contact info? I'm sending you a legal letter. And then that should be the last call you have to take. It won't be, because you'll probably have to send it 3 or 4 times. But now we know that if you're documenting all those contacts, you actually can have some recourse against the creditor there.
Interesting. Blair, I learned so much. You broke it down in a fantastic way. Thank you so much for your time tonight on this very timely subject.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, that was the president of Sands & Associates, a licensed insolvency trustee, Blair Mantin. Now, after a little business, pipeline politics are back in BC, and our premier has not been clear on where our province actually stands. So is it any surprise that BC was excluded from recent discussions about a pipeline through our province offloading at our northern coastline? We'll talk about it up next.